Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Howdy ho there, folks. This is Dame Pasty from WatchersOnTheWall.com with your weekly brush-up of last week's episode entitled Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken. You're probably wondering why I started with Mr. Hanky Poo. Well, that's because after watching this episode, I felt like crap, and it made it pretty hard to get motivated to do this video. But I've rallied back and I remain unbroken. So let's get to it, shall we? First, we see Arya in Braavos washing several different bodies and anointing them with oil. The other corpse scrubber stops her from going into the mysterious door. She tells her a tale about her background, some nonsense Cinderella story, and Arya buys it. So she is still losing the game of faces. We see Arya again sleeping when Jaqen H'ghar, aka Nobody, enters her room and plays the game of faces, hitting her for lying. Her first lie was that her father had died in battle. Her second lie was that she killed a stable boy by stabbing him in the back. Third one is that she hates the Hound, and she says that 3 times. And the fourth one is she says Polliver kidnapped her. And the fifth lie is that she does truly want to be no one. Next we go to Jorah and Tyrion, who's still on the same beach. Tyrion complains about Jorah's attitude, and then he lets slip that Jorah's dad is dead. There was some great nonverbal acting here. Do you think that Jorah really wanted to redeem himself with his father? Like most kids who have let their fathers and families down, they usually do. And I bet someday he wanted to return triumphant with Dany, who would bring peace and prosperity to Westeros. Now that'll never happen, and I'm sure that's on his mind. Again we go back to Arya in the House of Black and White, where she helps kill a little girl and she lies while doing it. This made me real uncomfortable, but it is a house of assassins, so maybe I'm just being stupid. So now she's killed this little girl, she's earned the right to go into the bowels of the House in Black and White. And when I say bowels, I mean Stygian darkness. And Jaqen leads her to the Hall of Faces. Now, any normal little girl would run the fuck out of that room, because boy, oh boy, is that some weirdness or what. But not our little Arya. Nope. She's entranced and curious. Hell, she touches one of those skin jobs. Ugh. She isn't ready to be no one, but apparently she is ready to be someone else. Then we go back to Tyrion and Jorah again. And Jorah is explaining why he follows Dany. He's got that born-again feeling, I guess. And Tyrion asks, okay, what happens after she conquers Westeros? And Jorah doesn't really have a fucking clue, which goes to show you just how much Dany needs Tyrion and why he's perfect for the job. He's a planner, a long-term thinker. So, of course, things are not going to go according to plan, otherwise there would be no show, and they run into slavers who want to kill the old man, aka Jorah, and cut off Tyrion's little junior, which is not so junior according to him. Tyrion's slick tongue saves his hide once again, and as a bonus, he saves Jorah too. He saves Jorah by promoting him as one of the world's best fighters, which means they're on their way to Meereen again, and Jorah will most likely end up in the fighting pits. Finally, we go back to Westeros and we see Littlefinger in King's Landing. And who does he run into but Lancel, and he manages to out-creep the creep. Then he meets with the Queen Beach, and while there, Littlefinger maneuvers to take the Vale troops to Winterfell on behalf of the Lannisters, supposedly to retrieve Sansa's head. Now, many think he is betraying Sansa, but I don't think so. I think he's just giving himself some cover with Cersei and buying some time for what he's going to do anyway, which was to take Vale troops to Winterfell. I don't think he ever planned on giving Sansa's head to Cersei, but since we know he was perfectly willing to sell her like one of his cheapest whores to the Boltons, he isn't beyond pretending to betray her now. And if it should come down to it, if Littlefinger needed to sacrifice Sansa to save himself with Cersei, he'd do it in a heartbeat. Ultimately, what he's doing here is playing both ends against the middle and hedging his bets. Finally, we get back to Dorne, where we meet Trystane and Myrcella for the first time, and they are busy sucking face, and Doran and Arya are watching them from the balcony up above and talking about how they need to protect them. Entree Jaime and Bronn to the outskirts of the Water Gardens. Bronn is singing the Dornishman's Wife, and I guarantee we will at some point get to hear the last verse of that song. So basically the plan is Jaime and Bronn are going to sneak into the Water Gardens, and there they find Trystane and Myrcella still sucking face. Deus ex machina, Charlie's Angels arrive at exactly the same time. What a coinky-dink! So of course there's going to be a confrontation. The scene is cut really bad, and people are moving too slow, and it just doesn't make sense. I suspect they had to work in some stunt doubles for the Angels. The one thing I could take out of it was that Bronn got cut on the arm by one of Oberyn's poisonous daughters. Back in King's Landing, the Queen of Thorns briefly talks to Margaery in preparation for her meeting with Cersei. Olenna and Cersei bash heads. And just when you think Olenna will ream Cersei a new asshole, it doesn't happen. Olenna leaves with what she came with, a big fat 0. And I totally didn't expect that. So vavoom off to the Inquest, where we see Loras looking fine. Even with that beard and all roughed up, he just looks, So of course Loras lies on the stand. He has to. And then Margaery lies. Of course, because she has to. And even if you're not a book reader, you had to know that Oliver was waiting in the wings to testify, because why would they have featured a tertiary character like him for so much time if they weren't going to use him for something important? So the Faith militant take Loras, and they take Margaery, and Tommen sits there with the most clueless look that has ever graced the small screen. Really, Tommen? You didn't even try. Back up to Winterfell, where little Miss Slap-and-Bite has come to help Sansa clean up before the ceremony, and Miranda tries to scare her by telling her true horror stories about Ramsay. But Sansa isn't buying it, and she tells Miranda, shut the fuck up, get the fuck out, and I was like, that's what I'm talking about. So then off to the Godswood. The beauty of the scene makes a mockery of the tragedy really occurring here. So during the ceremony, Theon has to say the words, and he reminds himself and everyone else that he was a foster child to the Starks. And Sansa says, I do, but after a really long pause and very trepidatiously. Then we get the weirdest fucking smile I've ever seen outside of a Charles Manson selfie. Now for the last scene. First, let me say that I have to give a great deal of praise to Alfie Allen. He does so much with so few lines, and he was wonderful in this scene. I cried and was more traumatized from this scene than I was from the Red Wedding. In fact, I was pretty tired and depressed the whole next day because I had serious trouble falling asleep, and boy oh boy was I angry that night. But that mellowed out the next day after rational thought was once again possible. The truth is, I should have known this was coming. Ramsay is a sadist, and sadists can't get it up unless they are hurting somebody. Also, Sansa, for all her bravery, returned to Winterfell thinking that Ramsay was just another guy, and interviews with the writers indicate that Littlefinger didn't know that Ramsay was a monster. She didn't know he was a monster. Even after the dinner, he could have just been a jerk who likes to fuck with people's heads, and they're basically emotional abusers, but that doesn't mean they physically abuse someone. So how is she supposed to know that he's the kind that not only likes to torture people in their head, but their bodies as well? And then we get Miranda's warning. Sansa may have brushed it off because she knows it's coming from a place of jealousy, and even if she did want to pay attention to it, it's too late. There's no time to light the candle. Sansa probably thought when she went to Winterfell that she was going to submit to betting like any other woman would have, knowing it would probably hurt because losing your virginity does, and she probably wouldn't enjoy it because he's a stranger and it's uncomfortable, etc., etc. But she didn't expect to be violently raped and humiliated, and make no mistake, that's what it was. I know that it wasn't according to Westerosi law or custom. I know that Ramsay could do that to her every day for the rest of her life, and she couldn't complain about it, and no one would stop him because it's all perfectly legal. And that's another thing. Of course Ramsay was going to be cruel. For the first time, he can legally torture someone. Hell, he can brag about it without repercussion, so of course he's going to take advantage of it. The other thing I should have remembered is that Sansa doesn't have the seduction skills necessary to manipulate a beast like Ramsay. She could manipulate Littlefinger because she looked like her mother, and because Littlefinger needed to have her work on his behalf. And that meant not alienating her, and sexual advances would have done that. Also, Littlefinger needed her virginity intact, or at least he thought he did. So Sansa could manipulate Littlefinger, but Ramsay was a different kettle of fish altogether. Even someone like Roz, who knew how to handle men very, very well, wouldn't have been able to handle Ramsay, I don't think. Hell, Roz wasn't able to handle Joffrey, who was a rank amateur next to Ramsay. So it was completely unrealistic for me, for us as an audience, to expect Sansa to become some femme fatale in light of her experiences today. Now, many have been saying it was a gratuitous rape scene. This assertion assumes that there was no reason behind the scene, that it was simply meant to shock us or titillate us. Truth is, we don't know yet. I mean, it certainly wasn't titillating because we didn't see the actual rape. But to shock us, I think there might have been more to that. There are only 3 ways to really know. One, we'd have to be mind readers and would be able to get into D&D's heads or the writers' heads. Or 2, they tell us in an interview, which they might not be able to do because of way number 3, which is we wait and see what the story reveals to us. And we may not know until the end of season or the end of the show the purpose of the scene. Will it ironically serve to empower and strengthen Sansa, meaning that she comes out tougher and taking more control of things? Will she enact some kind of revenge on the Boltons as a result? Or will it motivate Theon to stop being weak and help Sansa? And in regards to Theon, many complain that by focusing on his face alone, the producers shortchanged Sansa, meaning that, once again, a woman's rape becomes about a male character's reaction to it, how it affects him instead of her. Now, we see this all the time in real life in patriarchal societies. The woman's suffering becomes secondary or even tertiary considerations to how it affects her family, her father, or even the rapist. I get this point, and I would agree, except for the fact that focusing on Theon's face could have served three other important purposes. First, Theon is meant to be a stand in for us, the helpless third party in the room. His horror and grief is our own. This is a common cinematic technique. Second, sometimes not showing something makes it worse than actually seeing it does. There are many movies, some of them classics like Psycho and Alien, that use this technique. The imagination often creates horrors that the eye cannot. Third, focusing on Theon's face allowed us to avoid the ugly details that most likely would have pushed the audience even more over the edge and would have served to titillate people. I, for one, was very grateful they didn't show Sansa's face or Ramsay and her together. That would have indelibly stamped it in my brain forever. Now, there have been other movies where they did show the rape, and I can see those scenes clearly in my head to this day. I really don't want to see Sansa in my brain that way for the rest of my life. They spared us that, and thank goodness they did. All that being said, if the show doesn't make the scene mean something for Sansa's character development and it only helps Theon's arc, then I think that the scene was exploitive in a way that we see every day in our own society. If the show ignores it and it never meant anything, then we can all say, yes, it was gratuitous and wrong. And that's all I'm going to say about this scene until the end of this season or potentially the end of the show as a whole. Overall, without considering the last few minutes, it was a decent episode. I'm hoping that the title, Unbent, Unbowed, Unbroken, wasn't so much about what happened in the episode as it will be about the future development of the characters. I still am not impressed with the Sand Snakes, and the only person in Dorne that interests me is Duran, and the possible upcoming interaction he's going to have with Jaime. So, not my favorite episode, the worst of the season so far in my book. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time.